Welcome, everyone. This is the inaugural CDO TechVent, and we are glad that you are here with us today. My name is Wayne Eckerson. I'm the host of this event and president of Eckerson Group. As you may know, each TechVent focuses on a single emerging technology in the data and analytics space, such as data catalogs, which we're exploring here today. We created CDO TechVent because we know how overwhelming data and analytics technology has become. There are so many new products out there to evaluate that it's hard to tell the difference between them and know which will work as promised. Most importantly, it's often challenging to get sufficient user adoption for newer technologies and thus reap their full value. In the next 3 hours, we will give you all the context you need to make astute technology buying and implementation decisions. This is the most compact way that I know to deliver the information and insights you need to successfully deploy new data and analytics technologies. So today we're talking about data catalogs. In April, we'll focus on data governance platforms. And then after that, we'd love your input to decide which topics to talk about next. Now, let me step you through today's agenda. First, our keynoter, Sanjeev Mohan, will share key trends shaping the data catalog market and a product positioning framework that we created. Then we'll jump into a lively discussion among 4 leading data catalog vendors who will discuss how to evaluate and select the right data catalog for your organization. Then we'll have 6 breakout rooms where you can share your opinions and ask questions of our vendor partners. See the chat window for links to all the breakout rooms. After the breakout rooms, our distinguished CDO panel will discuss tips for implementing a data catalog. If anyone is struggling to gain adoption for a data catalog, which we know is a key challenge, you won't want to miss this. In our final keynote, Sanjeev will return and outline key criteria for evaluating and selecting a data catalog. And then finally, Sanjeev and I will wrap up the event by discussing our key takeaways from what we've heard and solicit yours as well. I should also mention that there's a virtual bake-off session associated with this event. Yes, a virtual bake-off. So how does that work? We asked each vendor who's participating in our event to create a 15-minute video using a script that Eckerson Group created. We then posted each of their videos to our CDO TechVent website and the Eckerson Group YouTube channel. Our goal is to make it easy for you to compare leading data catalog products and, perhaps more importantly, give you a sense of what's possible with data catalog technology. I'll have to say from my own personal experience that using this virtual bake-off, it's an invaluable resource. By investing a little bit of your time, you'll learn a lot and save oodles of time in the long run. So check it out. Finally, I'd like to recognize our partners who helped make this event possible. Our vendor partners, Data.World, Elation, Big ID, Irwin and Sandhill, which is a leading partner in the data governance space, Prometheum, and OneTrust. Our media partners who help promote the event are Bloor Group, New Vantage Partners, Bark, Datanami, Dama International, and TechTarget. Since some of you may not know us, Eckerson Group, I'd like to say that we are a research, consulting, and advisory company specializing in data analytics. Our research division produces many reports, but it also produced a companion report for this event called Trends in Data Catalogs, which you can also find in the chat window and download. And our consulting and advisory groups are busy working with companies like yours, developing data strategies, modern data architectures, data governance and MDM programs, self-service analytic strategies, and more. Finally, a few housekeeping items. Use the Q&A windows to submit questions. Use the chat window to find useful links or talk to our administrator. We'll provide a copy of the slide deck from this event to all registered attendees. And finally, we'll make a recording of this event available on our CDO TechVent website next week. So with that, let's have our first poll of the day. We want to engage you in our discussions, so we'll periodically run polls. So here's the first poll. What is the status of your company's data catalog? And please answer. People answering, give it a little bit more time. Okay, looks like we're done. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share it. There we go. So looks like we have plurality, 40% who are planning to deploy, 25% partially deployed, 10% fully deployed, and 24% have no plans at this point in time. We assume you're consultants or academics helping others. So thank you for responding, and we'll do this periodically throughout the event. All right, so let's move on to our keynote presentation. To set the context for our discussion today, I'm honored to introduce Sanjeev Mohan. Sanjeev is a seasoned data enthusiast with 3 decades of experience in data management. Since starting his career at Oracle, he has been a practitioner and researcher in the field. Most recently, he was a research vice president at Gartner, where he led the agenda for modern data architectures and pipelines. He is currently passionate about the wide space of data governance and data observability. I can personally attest that Sanjeev is a chronic learner, always looking to grasp the finer details of new advancements in the space of data and analytics. He speaks regularly at conferences and publishes many papers. When he does manage to get his mind away from data, which is very rare, you can find him globe-trotting the world. He has visited more than 115 countries with dozens more to go. So please join me in welcoming Sanjeev Mohan. So I'm going to give you the virtual applause, Sanjeev.
Thank you, Wayne. It's such a pleasure. It's actually a privilege to be participating in this event today. As you said, it's an inaugural TechVent event with many more to come. I am delighted to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is this overall space of data governance, and data catalog, as we all know, is a major part of our space. So with that, I have an exciting set of slides to present today. So I'll quickly move into this. When Wayne did his introduction, he talked about this companion report, which is a survey result. So we did a survey before this event. We got over 100 responses. And what we found out was that an overwhelming 93% of the respondents said that data catalogs are crucial, they're important. Some of them have fully deployed. Actually, interestingly, Wayne, I just noticed our survey showed 10% fully deployed, and the audience also replied with exactly that number, 10%. But only 7% are not into this space. So I think the consensus is there. Data catalogs are red hot. There is no doubt about it. Now, as we go further into the deck, we'll see that unfortunately, every silver lining has a dark cloud. So there are some challenges that we will cover in a bit. But for now, I want to dive into why is there an overwhelming consensus that data catalogs are important. And the reason for that is because earlier on, when data catalogs first came into the scene, they were very IT focused, mostly for technical metadata. And the whole goal was risk aversion or risk management. But in the last few years, we have seen that while the risk management piece is definitely true, there is an additional benefit that we are deriving, which is helping us with doing more intelligence on our data, understanding the context of that data so we can do more. So let's look at how data catalogs have evolved. So I'm going to primarily focus on the right-hand side. And as you can see, we are now seeing data catalogs are more business-driven, business-led, but with very strong participation from IT nevertheless. We also are seeing that the consumers for data catalogs have also exploded. It used to be that there were only a few people who actually used the data catalog, but now we are starting to see that data analysts, even data scientists, data engineers, we are seeing that there's a wider adoption in terms of number or types of users who are using it. Why is that? That is because we were trying to catalog only the structured assets in environment, and these were mostly coming from relational database management systems. But now we are starting to see we are also cataloging reports, queries, and more, even the machine learning models are starting to get added into our data catalogs. Like everything else, we are seeing there's a big migration of catalog vendors from on-premises into the cloud. In the first instantiation of this migration to the cloud, these products were mostly run on virtual machines as IaaS. Then we started seeing PaaS, but customers have spoken. They want a fully managed, fully deployed version that they can call using APIs. So we are starting to see that there's a big movement where data catalogs are becoming more SaaS products in the cloud. We also are seeing that data catalogs not only just keep data, but metadata, but optionally, they can also store and visualize data. So for very quick analysis of data, we can visualize data from sources. Now, to do any major business intelligence reports and dashboards, you would still use ABI tool, but we see that there is an expansion in the scope of data catalogs. The older data catalogs were static. They had rules. The rules were tagging the content based on the latest version of logic that was put in. The newer catalogs are AI or ML based. In fact, I would say in a few years, if I were to do this presentation again, I would probably take this line out because machine learning enabled data catalogs will become table stakes. This is the only way we can handle the vast amounts of data that we have to deal with. So we need algorithms to automatically infer relationships, tags, and classify the data. So my vision of data catalog is this is a place where data geeks, the users, the consumers of data go and hang out. This is where they collaborate, they annotate, they basically put in their information, their experiences. So when people who are going to come after you, when they go into the data catalog, they can trust that data because there's a trust factor. There is like confidence levels have been captured, quality scores have been captured. So we are seeing that there's a crowdsourcing collaboration is a very important component of a modern data catalog. The final thing that I want to talk about is that earlier on, I said data catalogs should be cataloging every asset in your organization. That also includes data in motion. We've seen a migration of data catalogs from being very batch data at rest to very quickly cataloging as new data comes into an organization. So this is all good news. So what does this lead to? So let's take a look at what are some of the newer use cases these catalogs are being put forward to. We have not given up regulatory compliance. Regulatory compliance still happens to be one of the most important use cases, but it is a defensive use case. It is something that you must do. If you don't do, then you're liable to pay huge amounts of fine or even worse consequences. But the fun starts in data catalog when we move to the right-hand side, because now the responsibility falls upon us, the practitioners, to expose all of these data assets that we have within our company so we can do more with that. Data discovery is just the foundation. Data discovery by itself is something that leads to a number of exciting use cases, such as we are seeing that the data preparation space has utilized the automatic recommendations that you're getting, the machine learning based discovery of relationships, like, how do you join tables? How do you look at rank your tables, your data assets based on the usage and the behavior? So all of that is helping us do our data preparation in a much smarter way, which is helping us with self-service analytics and making that pervasive. It is something that we need. If we talk about data literacy, then we need to be able to make self-service analytics be so intuitive that people want to come onto the platform and use it. Interestingly, Self-service analytics is not the only way we are consuming data. Just this year, we are getting bombarded with new data consumption models, such as data sharing. This includes things like data exchanges, data marketplaces. Also, there are new consumption models that you hear about pretty much every day, such as data mesh, data fabric. All these use cases need an easy way to discover the data in a very trusted manner. And we see there's a big movement of data catalogs to address these new consumption models. Interestingly, cloud migration is something that we see happening all the time. But what do I move to the cloud? Again, data catalog comes to our rescue. There is an easy way out. If you don't use a data catalog, you take all your data on premises, do a bulk lift and shift into the cloud. But now you're going to incur cost of data that's of very low value. Using a data catalog, you can assess and see what data assets ranked the highest, what are the most critical assets, and how do I move those into the cloud in a sort of an agile, iterative manner. So cloud migration is yet another use case. So now we are going to go back to our survey, and we are going to look at what I mentioned earlier, that what are the challenges that data catalogs are facing. We've already established that 93% of organizations say that data catalogs are a must, but we see the top 3 reasons why there's some hesitation: complexity, lack of adoption, and integration with other pieces of our data and analytics architecture. These architectures are very complex. We have a lot of specialized products that do, like they say, it takes a village to deliver a data and analytics environment. So we need the data catalog to be sort of bidirectionally integrated with whether it's data quality or it's master data management or it's an ETL tool that we are using, whatever it may be. That lack of integration is one of the top 3. I want to move to lack of adoption, because this, to me, is one of the more disturbing aspects. We can simplify the tool, we can do integration, but let's touch upon the adoption challenges that our organizations have told us. If you look at this chart, you will see that in the very high and high, if you add it up, it's only a measly 18%. So 93% of people are telling us data catalogs are important. 80% of people are saying they're too hard to adopt. And what gives? What is the reason why we are seeing this anomaly? So some of the challenges that we're hearing from our clients are, the first one is lack of intuitive interface. The user experience is extremely important when it comes to adoption of data catalogs. And we've seen a number of reasons why some clients have told us that they just don't use the catalog because it's just too hard to use. One is because some catalogs may have been developed for IT, and now the business is trying to use it, and business doesn't understand, has the same level of understanding, so the business stops using them. We've also seen cases where a product has grown through multiple mergers and acquisitions, and then different aspects of the product have a different user interface. This leads to a very complex workflow. And then finally, one of the big problems is change management, which is this whole culture of introducing the culture of data catalog and getting people to use the catalog more than do today. It won't be good if I just stop at challenges without sharing with you what are some of the best practices. So we talk to customers frequently about data catalogs, and here are a few best practices. Every asset that we want to catalog should have an assigned owner and a steward. But we also cognizant of the fact that within an organization, you could have hundreds, maybe even thousands of databases. Large organizations do have thousands of databases, but tens of thousands of columns and other assets. So start with the critical data elements, or CDEs. So once again, data catalog, sort of like a chicken and egg. You can put a data catalog, do a proof of concept, see what are your most important data assets, the critical data elements, then go back and start the process of curating that data. So obviously you are going to use the machine learning inference, but with the human augmented collaboration, you enrich the metadata that is being collected. One best practice that we have seen, it never goes wrong, is to set up a center of excellence. This center of excellence is responsible for promoting the data catalog, developing reusable assets, developing training programs, and just being the champions for the data catalog effort. Another thing that we have seen some of the most successful companies do is a gamification process, where there is some incentive for the business unit users, the subject matter experts, to come into the catalog and curate that data and maybe annotate it or just rate it high. So data scientists can come and they don't have to spend time talking about, is this the right data or not? They can just go to the data catalog and they can get the details, the common definition, and so on. Now, what I'm alluding to are the components of data catalog. So with this, I'm going to dive into what are the key categories that make up a data catalog product. Different vendors may call these things differently, but essentially these are some of the key aspects that every data catalog provider must give you. For example, connectors, connectors to all kinds of structured, semi-structured, unstructured data, not just, relational databases, but even files and files in different formats, or even unstructured data with some sort of natural language processing. So you can do keyword extraction and then catalog that. Then the ability to profile the data, classify it from a technical point of view, or sensitive data discovery, where you are basically tagging social security number as PII and date of birth as PHI, or whatever classification you may have. Then you need the business glossary, so you can get a lineage of where the data originated, who is consuming it. All of this requires curation of data and finally certification of data. Behind the scenes, we need to have a workflow. So a new employee can go and request access. We can capture the consent, which is required by GDPR and other compliance regulations, and a robust search mechanism. The search mechanism could use a knowledge graph. Basically, what we are attempting to do is give something like an Amazon.com experience, but for data, by exposing metadata. So that is the whole idea. And then, of course, you need APIs to not only programmatically extract data, but also to integrate it with different aspects of your environment. Talking about different aspects of your environment, data catalogs don't live in a silo, in a world of their own. These data catalogs need to have a bidirectional integration with things like data quality monitoring or data orchestration or data quality remediation product. By doing this bidirectional integration, I can define my policies or my rules in one place, let's say in a catalog, and the data quality can then remediate the issues and write back the results into the catalog. So catalog becomes the single source of truth for all the metadata, but it has these connections to even maybe data access governance product, where you are accessing who has the right privileges to see data. So this is, all of this together is what we call data governance platform. This is what Wayne had mentioned earlier. This is the topic for our TechVent in April. Now, why am I showing you this? Is because when we finish this event and we come to the last part, I will be talking about the evaluation criteria, which is very closely linked to this diagram, and you will get to see it once again. But for now, we are going to shift gears into the last main section, and this one is, if I may say so, a bit controversial, because we have tried to put the vast number of data catalogs into some sort of a framework. This is very similar to Gartner's Magic Quadrant, but it has nothing to do with it. We have totally different criteria. We are looking at adoption on x-axis and functionality on y-axis. On x-axis, we have divided adoption into emerging and established. Emerging are products that may not be new in terms of their existence, but they have a more contained adoption. Established are the ones that either have a wide market adoption or they're established within a particular ecosystem. So I'll show you that in just a few minutes. On the left-hand side, we see functionality. Of course, we've divided into pure play data catalogs and those products, data catalogs that have one or more of the data governance platform features. So with that, very quickly, here is a definition. We start from, I'm going clockwise for this, and starting from what in Gartner Magic Quadrant would be the leader quadrant, but we don't think of it that way. We think of products here as ones that are integrated and they have reached that escape velocity. So the market has adopted them pretty widely, as opposed to the ones below them where we see more targeted functionality. However, they are also widely adopted within that contained ecosystem. I want to talk about this one on the bottom left. This actually is one of my favorite quadrants. And the reason I want to emphasize on this is because when I used to take Gartner Magic Quadrant, I noticed there was a kind of a bias against products here. But these are sort of best of breed, very well focused products that perform a certain function, but they do it very well, as opposed to having a bit of everything. So please do not ignore the products that are in here. They serve a very important purpose. Finally, the last quadrant, integrated products that are relatively newer, and hence they don't have the same sort of adoption that you see from the box on the right-hand side. With that, let's look at the products. So this is when the fun starts, and this is where not everyone agrees to the placement of these products. What you will see in the next few minutes, a list of products that we've classified. Some of them are bold. If you see they're bold, it's because they are the sponsors to this event. What you expect to see in this box are all the obvious ones: Alation, Collibra, Informatica, and IBM's Watson Knowledge Catalog. So these are some of the big players. There are a lot of big players, by the way, but you will see them in just a few minutes. Also in the category where you've got a more targeted functionality, but they've also achieved a wide adoption either in the market or elsewhere, are these products. Data.World and Big ID are the two that sponsors for our event today. But you see all the cloud providers, and you see products like Oracle's data catalog is pervasive within an Oracle ecosystem, and so on. Finally, I want to come to this category, which I've already told you that these are products that do things very well in their targeted area. And then we've got this final category of integrated products like Quest Urban and OneTrust. I've already mentioned these because they're emerging. That doesn't mean they're new. Quest Urban's been around for a very long time, but they are now starting to expand their market presence. What gives me great pleasure actually is to show you the next list. And that next list is something that we normally don't get to see because they're open source vendors. And I put them in the pure play. There are a number of data catalogs floating around in the market today. A lot of these data catalogs come from technology vendors like Netflix, Facebook, Uber, but they're not necessarily open source, even though they are pretty well known, and they tend to be more focused on trying to solve their problems. These companies have had to solve extreme scale of data problems. So some of them have open sourced their products, such as Munson comes from Lyft and Data Hub comes from LinkedIn. Both of them and they tend to be more focused on trying to solve their problems. These companies have had to solve extreme scale of data problems. So some of them have open sourced their products, such as Munson comes from Lyft and Data Hub comes from LinkedIn. Both of them quite widely being explored. Munson has a commercial company called Stemma, and Data Hub has Acrel. The next one you see, LF, stands for Linux Foundation, and Linux Foundation also is trying to come up with an open source option. Egeria is the name of this product, and some banks have started to explore it. And then there's good old Apache Hive Metastore, where the big data first started getting the notion of a data catalog. And Apache Atlas was developed on top of Hive to do things like data classification, policy definition, and so on. So what you see here are a list of products. However, we see there are at least 75 to 100 data catalog products that I track. And so we decided to create a slide called embedded data catalogs. We define these not necessarily as something that's embedded within a product, because they may be available as standalone, but the genesis of the products mentioned here, non-data catalog use cases. So I'm not going to go through this list. This is, again, a fraction. There are a very, very large number of data catalogs because they are so foundational. So I want to welcome you to the next event, which is going to be a vendor panel. When we started preparing for the TechVent event, we reached out to a number of data catalog providers. We divided them into 3 different groups: established, emerging, and those who are going to participate in the virtual bake-off. And from the ones that we invited, we picked 2 so we could have a meaningful, well-contained event. And you will see the vendor panel will have Alation and Quest as established, data.wood and Big ID in the emerging categories, and that starts soon after I finish. So I'm going to end by saying that I hope I have convinced you that data catalogs are an essential part of any new modern data and analytics environment. They help bring together the various analytical approaches. They reduce the time to experiment and make mistakes and do second guesses of what the data means. And they overall help with data literacy. With that, I'm going to open this up for Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, great work, Sanjeev. Interesting presentation. I'm personally wondering, you spent a little bit of time on the open source. Are you recommending them versus commercial products?
I would not wholeheartedly recommend them. I would say they should be part of your evaluation criteria, but they still tend to be narrowly focused on a niche use case.
Okay. Question from Tejbir. How do you feel data discovery tools are shaping up to deal with the vast amount of data within organizations? Discovering data based on metadata may not reveal correct data, but doing detailed data discovery takes a lot of time. Do you think the problem will be addressed?
So I see this problem is being addressed, and the credit goes to 2 things. One, the machine learning based inference that I mentioned, and secondly, the advancements in the infrastructure. And what I mean by that is that if I use a SaaS-based environment, I was limited on the amount of hardware resource I can put forth to address data discovery of vast amounts of data. But now, if I have the ability to elastically or manually scale up and scale down, then I can contain my cost. I can bring a lot of new instance types to bear, and I can cover that data discovery much more efficiently.
Okay, great. Question from Chuck. Where would Tableau data catalog sit on the chart? I think you actually addressed that in the following chart.
Correct.
Yeah, it's more of an embedded data catalog. Maybe you can address, though, if you have an embedded data catalog, do you need an enterprise data catalog like that was sitting on the quadrant chart? How do those 2 play together?
Yes. So a very good question. We are very quickly, whether we like it or not, entering a highly decentralized, distributed analytics environment. And this is happening because of data meshes, data fabrics, and so on. And I'm not predicting they will, by the way, take off. I'm just saying that there is momentum in that space. When you see momentum in that space, you are seeing that there are domain-driven catalogs which may be more focused, but then you need some sort of a federated, I'm calling it a catalog of catalog. So you need an enterprise data catalog that can federate the distributed stewardship from domains. So a domain may have, maybe it's a small domain and their salespeople, they are happy with Tableau's data catalog since that came up. But another department may have heavy data engineering, data transformation focus, and they may put, one, not to pick one from the list, but let's say Irwin, because Irwin has ETL source code discovery capabilities. So you may have different catalogs within domains, but you still need, for the shareable data, you will need to plug it together to an enterprise data catalog. So I don't think the embedded ones are going to cut it in a much larger analytics environment.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. One from Brian: are there open published schemas, data models for data cataloging as opposed to just open source products?
Yeah, very good question. Actually, I happened to look into one open source provider that I didn't mention here called Open Metadata that is trying to create a canonical data model that everyone can use. I don't think there is one from commercial vendors. I think every product has its own model so far.
Here's a good one from Greg. What approach would you use to engage and persuade executive leadership in a government organization to adopt a data catalog approach where resources are stretched thin?
Yes. Thank you, Wayne, for throwing all the difficult ones to me. So you can pay me later. So this is, by the way, it's not just government organization, it's everywhere where we see this is such a problem that we are trying to solve, where it's like, how do you bridge the gap between the cost of the data catalog and the value that organizations derive? Because it's not tangible in the sense that, we fixed X number of bugs or we put so many machine learning models into operation. So the way I explain it is you really have to see how much time your data scientists are spending just curating, discovering, wrangling, Rubik's Cube of data and wasting their time. I've also advised people, look at the number of Slack or Teams, your government maybe use whatever software you use. See how many requests are coming in where every new person is saying, hey, how do I find the definition of sales metrics, or where do I find this data? The reason why government, your department, people are stretched thin, the resources, is because you don't have a catalog.
Okay, great. So we're just about out of time. Lots of great questions. We'll address these, everyone, if we didn't get to yours. But I want to sneak one little one in, Sanjeev, from Ashish, very quickly. And this is probably for everybody, to be honest. If you have thoughts on it, please send it along. Data catalog name seems to be very traditional, like a telephone directory or a card catalog, which you saw in the opening video. Is there a better name for data catalog?
So Wayne, like how many times we talk to vendors and they say, so many people have jumped into this space called big data, data virtualization, data preparation. We're looking for a different name. So Ashish, I understand your sentiments. Yes, catalog may sound old, but I would say focus on the problem you're trying to solve, just chasing after the right term and terminology. A lot of analysts forums actually do that for a living. And I used to be part of that too. And I would spend most of my time trying to decipher and define what does that term mean. And I really strongly believe it takes you away from the problem at hand when you're just trying to explain what does a NoSQL database mean, so just look at the problem and focus on that.
Great. Thank you, Sanjeev, very much. Appreciate your time. And now we are going to move to our vendor panel, much anticipated vendor panel. And I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while. We have representatives, as you see here, from 4 leading data catalog vendors who will discuss how to evaluate and select a data catalog. I've asked them all to engage in a spirited but friendly discussion. This should be fun. So with us today, we have Tim Gasper, VP of Product at Data World.
Yeah, hey Wayne, glad to be here.
Awesome, great. Mitesh Shah, VP of Product Marketing at Elation.
Hi, Wayne.
Lauren Leroy, Director of Product Marketing at Big ID. Hi, Lauren. And Jeff Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants, representing the Quest Irwin Data Catalog. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, all.
So welcome to everyone. For you in the audience, I'm sure the discussion will generate a lot of questions. So as you've been doing, please put your questions into the Q&A button below, not the chat window, because we're going to put our breakout room links in the chat window. So you want to keep that free. So, but if you have a question for the panel, please use the Q&A button. So let's jump right into it. First question for all of our panel, and feel free to jump right in and answer. What things should customers consider when selecting a data catalog? We saw that a lot of people on this event, this TechVent, over 100 live here, the majority are in the process of looking for a data catalog. So what should they be looking for?
Well, I would say from the Quest Irwin perspective, one of the most important things is the ability to associate things. So when you think about a catalog, you're really thinking about two components. That is the semantical component, which is from the business perspective, what does it mean? And then from, let's say, the operational technical side of the thing, what is the abbreviation? What did you call it? What system did you put it in? So we really need to be able to associate something from a business glossary or a policy to something that is of technical nature, so that when I look at some sort of lineage, I could say that this concept, whether it be customer or address or something else, is associated with lots of different systems. Those systems have tables, those tables have columns, so that I can get an idea of where I might be able to find all of that. So associating things, I think, is a very important idea.
Yeah, I very much agree, Jeffrey. And, one thing I would add to that is that, in addition to thinking about association and things like that, really, zooming out, right? I think a lot of companies, and at Data.World, we really try to consult a lot of folks on this, is, they start thinking a little bit about the technology and how that's going to help them, when really it comes back to what are your goals, right? And a lot of times these features are going to help you achieve those goals. But if it, are you trying to improve your risk and your sort of your governance situation? Are you trying to tackle compliance? Are you trying to implement a stewardship program? Are you trying to create data enablement in your company and data products in your company? What are you trying to accomplish? And then it becomes very clear how association and how, discovery and how all these tools can really come to help you in achieving those goals.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big things.
I was going to say, I agree. I agree with both those statements. And Tim and Sanjeev talked about this also, but what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? So if you know what the problem is you're trying to solve, you know what kind of catalog you're looking for. And I think what you'll see today is that we all, and this came up also in Sanjeev's discussion, but we all talk about data catalogs, but what each catalog offers is a little bit different, right? So on the Big ID side, we'll talk about, it's all based on know your data. So it's all based on discovery. And how do you discover your data at scale, add classification, and how do you do that? How to automate this and use machine learning in that way. But what you'll see is, and also this came up this morning also, that the many enterprise organizations will have more than one solution that's called a data catalog. So it could be an embedded data catalog in a specific tool, like mentioned the Tableau, or also something that's a data catalog that's meant for a data analyst or data scientist, or a data catalog that's meant for, IT, and so finding that one solution, I think, is you want things to integrate for sure at the enterprise level, but it's back to, as Tim was saying very well, is find what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then find the right catalog for that solution. And it might take more than one.
Couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. I think we're all one big happy family here, it seems. It's wonderful. Look, I'll add just a couple of things to this, which is, to Tim's point, to Lauren's point, it is about the use case and about making sure that you're clear on what you're trying to do and making sure you're getting value from that use case with whatever tool you ultimately select. There are product capabilities that can help you get there, but there's also vendor capabilities that can help you get there. Companies, professional services offerings that can help you get off the ground, for example, which we do. When we first sell the catalog, we make sure you get off on the right foot with organizational change and dynamics that might be taken into account. But from a product perspective, going back to what was said earlier in the keynote, you really want to make sure that the product is simplifying people's lives and not making it more difficult, right? It's about making sure you've got adoption. And in my view, that's really comes down to two things that are kind of orthogonal. One is making sure the user interface is, of course, dead simple. It's not, extra work for somebody to kind of go in and kind of figure out how to search for things. But on the flip side, and what may not be obvious, is intelligence. Right? We spoke a lot about how there's people that are organizations that are resource constrained. You want to make sure that technology is applying machine learning, as Sanjeev mentioned earlier, and making sure that it's simplifying things like stewardship tasks, like being able to search for the appropriate results. And so that stuff that's baked in and under the hood is less visible, but equally, if not more important.
Yeah, agreed, Mitesh. I think, when people talk about catalogs, when they're really effective and they're doing a good job for your company, they use analogies, right? They say like, oh, it feels like Facebook for data, or it feels like Amazon for data, or Google for data. To your point about adoption, right? At Data.World, we're so relentlessly focused on adoption. And if you're not focused on adoption as a company, looking at catalogs, implementing a catalog, you're going to run into failure, because so many times we see these sort of failure stories of companies trying to implement a catalog, but it's only for 5 or 10 users, or it's a very specialized use case. And ultimately, they don't end up getting the adoption that they need for it, not just to be sticky, but actually to have an impact in the organization. So I think as you think about adoption, about intelligence, about things like machine learning and knowledge graph and how they can impact your rollout and making it easier and more effective for people to get value out of the catalog, those are really, really important aspects to consider.
Also, I think the other point that is, the other thing to look at is how hard is it to set up the catalog, right? Yeah. So when you're evaluating different catalogs, it's how, because again, you don't want to buy the enterprise software, you make the investment, you'll make sure it's being used, and it's going to get used if it has value. It's going to have value if it has content. So how easy is it to set up that data catalog? And so when we talk about including machine learning, how do you discover all of your data? How automated is it to connect to your sources? How can you populate it to make it valuable? Because if you have a catalog and you prove it is valuable, people will use it, right? So making sure you have connections to all your key data, making sure, as Mitesh was saying, it's easy to use, easy to sort, making sure it's maybe you're going to be available for a wide variety of users and use cases. So making sure that you have easy to use that machine learning, to what you want it to do, because to offend anyone here and all you humans on the phone, but machines are better at humans for a lot of the things that we're doing in data management, right? So when you talk about data management, data governance, data catalogs, how do you use the machines to your advantage to do that on that crawl, find all your data, add context, add meaning, and then provide a catalog that's going to be useful to your whole organization.
If you guys recall from Sanjeev's keynote, the top challenge in our survey was tool complexity. You've mentioned a number of features that should make it easier, but why are users feeling that the tools are complex today?
I think it has to do a little bit with data literacy. There's one thing that you can do with these tools is that you can teach people how the tool works. Click this menu item, fill in this box, click this button, and it does stuff. But I find a lot of people, it's like, well, why am I doing that? And what does all this mean? Like, how do I get value out of this? And that kind of starts sometimes with a little education about data literacy, and then to orient them towards how the tool creates business value for you, not necessarily that I can type something in and go find, let's say, the definition of something. It's how is it that definition of, let's say, customer is not really related to something called a wholesale customer or a retail customer. What's the difference between all of these things? How does this affect, let's say, the fact that I don't have 360-degree view of customer? Literacy helps a lot with that.
I think that's a good point. And to add to literacy, another point here is that I think a lot of companies try to boil the ocean, right? They say like, oh, we're going to buy a catalog and we're going to address compliance and quality and better integration. And we're going to use machine learning and we're going to use knowledge graphs and we're going to create connections between things. We're going to assign stewards. And so they create this list 100 miles long of all the things they're going to do, and they're going to all do it by yesterday. Right. And that's not the right way to approach it. Right. One of the things that we talk a lot about at Data.World with our customers is this concept of agile data governance, where you really need to create a backlog, a use case backlog. And what is the most important thing that you should work on first prioritize that, and then pair up the right producers and consumers together to iterate, right, sprint style on those use cases, and then work your way down the backlog. Don't boil the ocean. That's a great way to really, have an unsuccessful catalog implementation.
Tim's point here is very well stated, right? You often see this sort of Frankenstein approach or Frankenstack approach with some vendors that are adding catalogs after the fact and then adding on quality and more. What you need from a catalog is, in our view, having it serve as your platform for data intelligence. And that can be for data search and discovery. It can be for things like data quality, for privacy, risk, and compliance, as we have this, great partnership with Big ID. It can be for a lot of different things, but you can't bake in too much into the product. And so, going back to your survey here, why is it that folks feel like these catalogs are too complex? Depends on what catalogs they've evaluated to date, I'd say. But I think this Frankenstack approach that some vendors have taken has influenced that survey.
I'm going to take another perspective on that one. So at Big ID, the way that we're built is that Big ID is based on a platform, and your core platform is based on discovery. So the catalog sits on your core platform, and that is what we're really good at is doing that discovery, applying machine learning, find all your data, add the context, add classification. But then you can add on more things to it. Once you have that value of discovery, then you can add on different modules, right? We call them apps. So you could add on something like data quality or data stewardship or all the other pieces that you would want to add on, but to consider them. So I guess maybe agreeing with Tim, it's not all in one, like just doing everything all at once, but to add and pick and choose what things you want to add on. And the way that that we're going to do that at Big ID is based on that core platform. So what you'll see is we do have a data quality solution, but that's based on the fact that you use that core machine learning, you use that core catalog, and then it integrates with that so that you're not all completely Frankensteining things together, which other vendors do, where you have all kinds of different things that have been cobbled together and they don't talk to each other properly. And you think you're adding in a single solution, and really it's making it more complicated. So the approach we're taking at Big ID is to have that core platform, the core knowledge, the discovery, and then you add on the pieces that you want, where you want to add value for your organization, and not to do it all at once, right? So talk about adoption, like how do you roll that out in a way that's going to be meaningful and logical and maybe one step at a time, so that you're being thoughtful about the adoption and implementation.
It sounds like you're moving to more of a data governance platform, which Sanjeev mentioned in his keynote. And, I don't know if that's the Frankenstack or not, but, and then some folks like Alation, Mitesh, you're more pure play, but it's interesting that you do have that relationship with Big ID.
Well, but, let me clarify that. I think don't take away from this that, some vendors are doing a Frankenstack approach and other vendors are doing applications on top of the platform. In fact, that's the same approach we're taking. We just introduced the data governance app in September, just a few months ago. And so I guess my point is, some vendors out there are sort of forcing different user interfaces for different personas into the same thing. Whereas what the approach that we're taking is this application plus platform driven approach, as is, it sounds like Big ID, where you can have this platform that's based on self-service, data search and discovery, driven by guiding users to the right data. And that's a perfect way for building that platform for things like data governance and much more down the road.
So what you're saying basically is we see two approaches. We see products that are organically growing with the capabilities, but they have the same core engine, as opposed to products where the engines are all separate, but they're trying to integrate at some higher level.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's about being thoughtful about the goal, right? Being thoughtful about where you're starting from and where you want to go. And so we do have different capabilities, but it's all based on that core function, and catalog sits right at the middle of it.
So I want to push back slightly here because, as you add, so Lauren, you mentioned data quality. Now, the customer's needs maybe for a more sort of full service data quality product. So how do they then decide whether to go with Big ID's enhancements for data quality or a standalone data quality product?
I say, again, it depends on your goals. So traditional data quality is maybe baked into each tool, right? So each different solution has a different data quality rules. You require maybe IT to go set up those rules. And what we're doing at Big ID is we're bringing that into the hands of the business users. So, and I'm sure that, Mitesh and Tim will agree here, but having, you want your data analysts, people who know the data best, to be using the data, right? And so we're doing it, the way that we're approaching data quality is saying, let's make those data quality rules super easy to use. For example, if I'm in marketing and I want to send out a mailer I want to make sure that all of my fields are populated. We have email addresses for everyone, and they're all formatted in the way that I see someone at something. It's an email address. So how do you set those data quality rules with the people who know the data best? And also, because we are looking at it from that first view of, we have the core platform and we can do all of that discovery and it's all consistent. How do you set the rule one time and have that one rule apply to all your data sources, rather than saying, okay, I need my SQL data quality rules, I need data quality rules for all the other components of my ecosystem? Set the data quality rules once at the core, the core level, and then have that applied to all your data everywhere, structured, unstructured, all your data all at once.
Yeah.
I would say it's also dependent on the persona, right? There are great data observability and data quality vendors out there, like the big eyes of the world, like Soda, that Alation has partnered both with over the past month and announcing deeper integrations with. But these tools are great for looking at data drift and kind of checking out what's going wrong in the data and doing that introspection and sort of alerting the data engineers, the folks that are responsible for kind of investigating and fixing those issues. But ultimately, you want your business users, you want everybody in the organization, as they're consuming the data, to understand whether the data that they're looking at is quality data or not. And so that's where Alation comes in. With this integration, you're able to provide that mechanism for everybody in the organization versus maybe just the data engineers that are responsible for addressing the data drift.
Yeah, I think Mitesh and Lauren, you're making really good points here. And one thing I'll add is that, if you look at your use cases and you really break down what you're thinking about for something like data quality, and you're looking at, observability or testing or monitoring or alerting or policy driven quality, like these are all sorts of different sub use cases around quality. You're going to find that either maybe your catalog is providing some of those capabilities, like Data.World has some of these data quality capabilities as well, or you're going to find, really, we're really interested in observability and how we can start monitoring these different sort of signals, do anomaly detection on how these things are changing over time. And I want to use something like a Monte Carlo or a Big Eye or one of these types of vendors, right? Ultimately, your catalog and your governance solution, they're kind of the hub. They're in the center. I really like, Sanjeev, when you stated that, the catalog is becoming the metadata single source of truth, because I think we're seeing that across all of us on this panel here, that people want the catalog to be the hub. And whether you're using the inbuilt capabilities of the catalog or you're leveraging some third-party tool, either a direct partner or, just a third-party tool, you want those things to be interoperable. You want to bring that metadata together in the hub, and then you want to activate that metadata. You want to take action off of it. And, all roads kind of lead through catalog when you look at it that way.
Right. It looks like there's an integration, sort of like a Venn diagram, if you will, between what we call data governance and what we call data management. They each do their own thing, but the data catalog is actually where those two circles begin to intersect. And the amount of overlap is really the functionality of the data catalog. How much governance is built into it versus how much data management's built into it. So the bigger the overlap, the more inclusive it is. Or you could have, as is quite common without data catalogs, a separate data governance activity and a completely separate data management activity, but there's no bridge between the two. So data catalog begins to pull these things together. And over time, I believe that overlap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
So a lot of questions from the audience, which is great here. A couple of questions on ROI. How do you measure or quantify the value of a data catalog tool?
Great question. Maybe I'll jump in real quick and then let others kind of jump in. Is that it goes back to those use cases that we talked about at the beginning. Like, what are you trying to drive towards, right? Like, for example, one of the companies that we work with at Data.World has over 18,000 people in the catalog, right? And they're trying to do data empowerment and data products. And for them, that's what success in ROI looks like. It's getting information in the hands of everyone, right? We have another customer that's in the real estate logistics space that has 200 or so users in the platform, but they're doing incredible amounts of documentation and connections around their assets, right? And for them, it's about how many connections have they created between these assets, so they have a related knowledge graph of the information, and that's what success means for them. So I think ROI is what you determine makes sense for your use cases, and just make sure you figure that out up front, right? Don't buy the catalog and then a year later be like, what are we trying to get out of this? Like that's an example of a bad pattern.
I would agree with Tim 100%, because essentially I was going to say the same thing, in that you really have to start from what the business wants to achieve. And then you map that back to what the catalog can provide for you, because it's going to be a difficult case to say, well, we logged 1,000 new terms in the business glossary. Well, that's a nice metric, but how does that relate to what the business wants to do? You have to be able to say, because it exists, you're able to find the definition of that thing a lot faster. And because you understood its meaning, you didn't get it confused with a synonym that's also out there that allowed you to publish a report that didn't have data that was erroneous. Then you can begin to calculate the benefits of the existence of a catalog to meet your business objectives. And that becomes a more meaningful ROI than to say, yep, we bought some technology and here's a bunch of statistics about the inputs, the outputs, the number of issues raised versus the number of issues resolved. Doesn't really mean that much to the business. If you ask the business people that, they'll be like, well, that's nice to know, but how does it help me get this report out faster? How does it help me make a better business decision? How does this help me with my stock price? Those are the things that they really want to know when it comes to ROI.
A couple of questions have come in, kind of chicken and egg questions. Do you have to have a data governance program to start before you have a data catalog? Do you have to have a data quality program before you have a data catalog? Which comes first?
At Big ID, we say you can't govern what you don't know, right? If you don't know what's there, how do you even know what to govern? How do you know what rules that you even need to apply? And so at Big ID, we say it all starts with discovery. And so using Big ID to automatically go scan all your data, create that catalog, create the awareness, and create the knowledge. So adding intelligence to know what the data is, add classification. What does it mean? Is it private? Are there regulations that you need to know about? Is it expiring? What's the data life cycle? So all of those things that are really important and essential, you can't govern what you don't know. So we say it starts with discovery.
I think it's a great response. And I would say just on the governance piece, we're close partners with the godfather of data governance, Bob Seiner. And he has this saying that, everybody is doing data governance. Everybody's already doing data governance. It's really about formalizing people's behaviors around data. That's what's called for. And the catalog really helps with doing that. And so, there's this notion that governance is this sort of 12-step journey where it takes years and years and suddenly you reach nirvana at the end. So it's not the case, right? Everybody has a starting point and it's all about continuous improvement, and the catalog can help you get there. Things like helping find and understand and govern data better.
Yeah, we have a completely flipped approach to that. We say it's all great to do discovery, but now you've got a pile of stuff. Who's responsible for it? What is the level of PII? What are the policies and the rules around how data can be used? What are the edges? What are the boundaries? What can we do with it? I need to know what that is before I go discovering a bunch of it. So if I get my understanding of how I want to handle change management, who's doing change management, how are escalations handled, and all those other things that have to do with the data, once you start discovering it, I need to know what those are first. Then it's easier to put it in place. Because what we find is a lot of people will buy a tool or technology and they will start to discover stuff, but they don't know who's responsible for that. And how does change happen when we find that something's not right? If I have that in place first, and then I put that on top of the catalog, things go a lot smoother because I can educate everybody on what they're supposed to do so that once they encounter it, and we determine what are the standards. Are we using ISO standard 11779-5 for naming things? What's the definition of quality? How do we know what quality is for a term? Sure, I can do data quality, but what's a definition quality look like? How many definitions do we have that the customer ID is the ID of the customer? Completely useless, right? So we need to have a lot of those governance things in place first. At least that's the way we look at it.
And just to jump in real quick before we move to the next topic here, I think, for those who are listening here, you've heard sort of two angles, right? There's sort of like the higher level angle of like, hey, you got to have the right governance program in place. You've got to have that foundation. And then you've also heard this other angle, which is a little bit more around discovery, right? Like, hey, go connect to things, understand as much as you can. Now you can take inventory and decide what you want to do with it. I'm going to do this fun thing that product managers like to do where I get to like split the difference a little bit here and say that like, we have seen some of our customers jump into discovery a little too quickly quickly without having enough of a foundation. And that can cause you a lot of problems, right? I'm sure even the big ID folks, you probably see this as well, but like if you don't have, I'll name 4 things: your goals, your measurement, like what is ROI, ownership, and core principles figured out, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. Now you can do that quickly, right? To Bob Siner's content, like you can start with something pretty non-invasive and just identify what you have today, use that as your jump off point. All right, cool. Now let's dive into inventory. Let's dive into discovery. Just make sure you don't do that without, having some of that foundation, or you're going to run into trouble.
And 100%, I do agree with that. Like we want to do all the discovery, but again, you have to have governance in place. And that's something also that Big ID can do, is that not only do you govern the data to just find the rules, but see where the rules don't apply and then take action on it. So be able to have that remediation, to apply the rules and take whatever action you need to make sure things are in compliance or within your policies and terms and governance. So yeah, I do agree with that. So when I say discovery, it's not just go out and discover everything with no boundaries, but you can't govern what you don't know, right? So having all the right rules, if you don't know what data is out there that needs to apply, you have rules, and how do you connect your data to it? I think also the other point that Jeff brought up too was about definitions, right? How do you make sure that things are well defined, and not who owns the data, but how do you decide who owns those definitions and what the definitions mean, and how do you attach the definitions, your privacy or your physical to logical? Like how do you make that connection? And so applying machine learning can help you there also.
Yeah.
Let me move to, we only have about 10 minutes left in the panel. Let me move to some technical questions that came in. One was about the ML components in the enterprise data catalogs. This person, Steven, said that he thinks they're pretty immature, meaning they require a ton of training and trial and error. He wants to know what your experience has been.
Maybe just to start here, and then I'll say that like machine learning is good at certain things, right? And there are certain types of things like classification, like being able to do, some recommendations and things like that, where machine learning can be really effective. And there are some use cases where it's just not as effective because you need large quantities of data and context to be able to feed it to be effective, right? And so the one thing I'd say here, just to start us off, is that like machine learning is a very important tool that is part of the tool chest, but you should really be thinking about, at Data.World, we're built on a semantic knowledge graph. And one of the things that we really think of is things like machine learning, rules-based approaches, inference-based approaches. These can all work together in combination with ultimately context, right? That is your knowledge graph, and that's what's going to power the most effective intelligence around your data.
I would agree.
Just to address the other technical question, which is about knowledge graphs, but I'll let others jump in here.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, and I agree with Tim in that one of the things that people struggle with is the context in which you're doing the evaluation. So from a metadata perspective, you've got a business, a technology, and operational metadata stacks. What is the thing looking for in what context? And to be able to have enough of those learning so that the machine knows what it's looking for in what context it's looking for it. So that's, one of the things that I see that people struggle with, the machine learning things.
And I think the way Big ID approaches it is we have some out of the box classifiers. So we know what a social security number looks like, right? There's some things that we know out of the box. You can plug it in and say, machine learning, go find these things. They look like this. But you also have the ability to set your own classifiers, and you can have custom classification. So you can use it out of the box and just find kind of standard, or you can say, based on this set of 10 things, go find things that look like this. And so you can use some customization also, and then also being able to use some correlation. So using machine learning in a different way to say, how do things look like, or what, if it's in a table next to something, when we find it again in a table, it's next to something else, well, how do those relationships work together? So it's how to apply it. And I think having both the out of the box classifiers or out of the box, machine learning abilities to do things really quickly out of the box, but also having that customization. So to your point, being able to, you want to do a combination of both. I think it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, agreed. You shouldn't do machine learning just for the sake of machine learning. Ultimately, there's a point for that. And, bringing it back to a point that Lauren made earlier around just being able to connect the catalog and get up and running quickly. This is what we've been doing from day one with being able to process query logs, for example, that are sitting in an organization's data sources. Right? You've got a lot of query logs that are already sitting there that's full of rich intelligence around who is using that data, how often that data is being used, how they're using it. And so we take that and we process it and we bring that into the catalog and surface it as users are actually consuming the data to make their lives easier ultimately. And so that's how machine learning and more broadly intelligence really makes folks' lives easier with Elation Data Catalog.
Question from Travis for Elation and Big ID. If you two companies are both data catalogs, why do you have a partnership? Is something missing in one that the other provides, or what is the benefit to their customers?
So I think the way that we work together is Big ID is really good at telling you what the data is. Elation can tell you really well how it's being used. So for example, use Big ID for discovery, right? Find the data, do the automated classification, add the context, see what PI data, do all of that in Big ID, and then integrate beautifully with Elation. So at Elation, you're using the data to find, know, understand, trust your data, find it all in Elation, and then add that, like, who's using it, right? So Mitesh was talking about the query log ingestion, which is really, really cool, by the way. Knowing like who's using it, what are the most popular data sources, how it's being used, and then adding in that context so that the two work together. So each one can be independent, but they're truly better together.
I assume, Mitesh, that Elation does the discovery as well, not just usage, right?
We do discovery as well, exactly. And so look, to put a bow on it, right? Big ID is classifying the data. They understand where all the sensitive data is. We're integrating with Elation, and now we have that information and we can apply it to other data sets and apply policies to those data sets and expose those policies as users are using the data. And so there is this sort of cycle here going on between Elation and Big ID. And I think back to, I think it was Wayne's or Sanjeev's point earlier, there's a notion of catalog of catalogs. Ultimately, there's lots of metadata sitting in various tools, and you're ultimately going to want to have all that metadata consumed in some place and taken advantage of somewhere. And so in some respects, that's what Elation is doing.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left in the panel, and we've entered the speed round, okay? We've got 2 questions that I'm going to ask you, and want each of the 4 of you to give us a 30-second or less, emphasis on less, response, okay? So first question is, looking into the future, into our crystal balls, how will data catalogs evolve in the next 1 to 3 years?
I guess I'll jump in since I've kind of alluded to that already, which is the data governance concept and the data management concept will begin to merge closer and closer together over time, so that data governance is essentially just a business as usual kind of integration into data catalog work. Probably the user interfaces will be simplified and more customizable, but at the end of the day, people aren't going to be saying, hey, I'm doing data governance. They're just going to be saying, I'm doing data work that's on top of the data management activities that I do.
So I think in the future, I think it's going to be about having more integration, right? I think it's essential as our data environments grow and data needs and data demands grow, being able to connect to more things, right? Having a single and integrated platform so that you're managing everything all in one, and growing with all of the, what's happening in the world, right? So as we're seeing at Big ID, we talk about, all the new compliance, all the new regulations that are coming out. So making sure as people are using data, they're using it the right way. They are using it, with regard to regulations, and we're seeing more and more data sharing. So between partners, between all the data networks, data marketplaces, making sure that you're taking all of that into account too. So having your catalog as your core source, but being able to keep in mind everything else that's happening in the world and grow with it.
I guess I'll chime in next and say that I think as we go forward over the next few years here and beyond, 2 things: adoption and knowledge graph. I think with adoption, you're going to see that over time, every company employee will have access to the catalog and the governance solution. It's going to become as ubiquitous as the intranet or the portal that you get access to when you join the company. And secondly, knowledge graph. Why is Google able to provide the best search? Because of a knowledge graph. Why is Apple able to provide the best personal assistant and Amazon able to provide the best shopping experience? Underlying all of these technologies is a knowledge graph. And I think we truly believe at Data.World that enterprise companies are going to build their enterprise knowledge graph. And that is going to be the future of catalog, of governance, of access, and of many of these different data paradigms.
Mitesh, you're last here.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Look, I think the catalog is already being seen as the platform for data intelligence for an increasing amount of use cases. It's not just about data search and discovery. It's also about data governance. It's also about helping with cloud data migration, as Sanjeev pointed out earlier. And so you're going to see a lot more of that. And I think you're going to see vendors focus a lot more attention on addressing those use cases even more going forward, and other use cases. And to Lauren's point, that's going to mean integration and interoperability on the one hand with vendors in this space, not just for data quality and data observability, but potentially master data management and privacy and more. And you're going to see vendors probably introduce sort of this unbundling concept where you've got applications that are, use case specific applications sitting on top of the platform going forward.
Okay, last question in the speed round here, and this is really unfair to all of you. And I know you'll have a hard time picking just one thing that is most unique about your product. You got less than 30 seconds because we have a minute left. Who wants to go first?
I'll start. So I'm saying it all along. I think discovery. I think what's unique about Big ID is the fact that we can do discovery, we can do automated classification on all of your data. So structured, unstructured data, data in the cloud, on-prem, in Motion, in lakes, wherever it is, and we can find it and discover it. So I think core discovery is unique to Big ID.
From the Irwin perspective, it's integration. Because of its heritage, it's built upon data mapping. So it has the ability to go and interrogate just about any data source, whether it's relational, big data, XML, anything, pull it in, and also be able to take that same information from the catalog and push it out. So it can go as deep as looking for something in a stored procedure that reinforces a business rule to, big data out there on the cloud.
I'm not going to talk technology. I'm going to go back to Tim's earlier point here, and let's actually talk about value and ROI. What's unique about Alation, I think, is the value that our customers get from Alation Data Catalog. We hear time and again how customers have failed with other tools because they're too technical, they weren't enterprise grade enough, and they just kind of sat as shelfware. Not so with Alation. Whether it's for data search and discovery, data governance, and a wide array of other use cases, customers are getting value out of Alation because it is being adopted and because it fits well in their enterprise environment, meeting their security and compliance requirements and more.
Some great answers across the board here. And what I'll say is, you might have heard me mention Knowledge Graph a few times here, and you probably think I'm going to say Knowledge Graph right now, but no, I'm going to say adoption is the most important thing with Data.World, because Knowledge Graph is in service of adoption. And whether it's the Knowledge Graph powering automated experiences for adoption, our user experience, our 100% would recommend rating in the last 12 months, ultimately, it's all about making sure that people adopt the platform.
Great. Thank you all for that. And at this point, I want to give you all a round of applause. That was very entertaining and informative. And I think everyone, including myself and Sanjeev, have a much clearer idea of your company, your products, and what it takes to succeed with the data catalog. Sanjeev, any last words before we put up another poll?
Yeah, just one last thing I want to say to all the viewers is that, if you listen to all the vendors, the overarching goal is the same, is to discover your data so you can derive more intelligence, search it through very intuitive workflows and have it integrated. So I think that's all 4 vendors are doing that. But for the viewers, it's really important for you to take it to the next level and see what does it take to get there. I think that's where things start differentiating. And to Lauren's point, it all depends on your use case, what you're trying to do, how many steps will it take you to get there. So don't evaluate at the highest level because they all will look the same. Just take the time to dive deeper into their capabilities.
Okay, thank you all very much. At this point, I'd like to put a little poll up for everybody here as our panelists are leaving. So if you could just rate the usefulness of this panel to you, we'd appreciate that quite a bit. Excellent job, panel. Thank you so much for your insights. You got me really excited about diving into your tools on our virtual bake-off. So I hope all the attendees do that. I'd like to encourage them to do that. And those will be up for indefinitely, to be honest with you. We hope to keep adding to it and have the existing vendors keep updating it as their products change. Okay, so at this point, we are very honored to have 3 experienced data management professionals on our CDO panel today. They will share tips for implementing a data catalog. The first is Srinivasan Sankar, Enterprise Data Leader at the Hanover Insurance Company in Boston. Srini is a visionary leader with broad experience in data enablement strategy, analytics, and data science. He has demonstrated success guiding organizations to transform their businesses by leveraging mature, modern, and open source technologies, including AI, machine learning, deep learning, augmented analytics, augmented data management, data mesh, blockchain, and many more. Welcome, Srini. It's good to have you on board.
Hello.
Shiva Rajagopalan has nearly 30 years of experience in data management and information technology. For the past 26 years, he has helped GE Healthcare develop its enterprise data and analytics capabilities. The company is now a leader in its field in leveraging data as a business asset and creating a culture of analytics that permeates every level of the organization. He has worked in almost all aspects of data management, including data capture, database management, data pipelines, data ingestion, data governance, to name a few. And finally, Gordon Wong is a hands-on collaborative analytics leader who has run data teams at HubSpot, EasyCater, and Fitbit, and now Jimdo. He starts with the business problem, creates blueprints for effective analytics solutions, and serves as the product owner for his teams. As a data warehousing geek, Gordon loves SQL, databases, data modeling, and analytics, and has tried most ETL data management tools out there and constantly thinks of new ways to accelerate analytics adoption. So with that, welcome to everybody on our panel and to our audience. Hopefully you are back from the breakout rooms. So let's jump right in this. Sanjeev, please chip in too with questions. And again, to our audience, please submit your questions via the Q&A button. So the first question is, we're talking about implementation here. What was the driving factor that caused you to purchase a data catalog in the first place? Who wants to tackle that one first?
I can go, Wayne.
Okay, great.
So this actually dates back to like 2017. Back then, like with our executive management, especially like CEO and other product heads, like, so they were talking to the industry outside, like insurance industry, in terms of big data analytics, like how we are going to use various predictive and prescriptive analytics to enhance customer experience as well as agent experience in the insurance, and also like create a lot of operational efficiency and effectiveness. So everywhere, like in front of like the Wall Street analysts, like even some insurance specific industry events, so they were talking about it, especially the CEO. So what I, back at the ranch here, like I started like, okay, so now we are out in the world, like talking a lot about data and analytics. So this is the question I asked to my management, immediate management here on the technology and data side, like, hey, do we know where our data is? Like we have 50, 60-year-old mainframe systems, and we've got like a lot of core insurance platforms that are across all our business functions and also like the major claims and billing functions. So I asked that question and then started building on it, right? Like, so in a nutshell, having a data catalog is a place that shows what data assets we have and where they are located. And this data asset is any entity, right? Like be it reports, databases, websites. And that led way to a foundational data asset program, data catalog asset program, which became the foundation for our enterprise data governance. Like the last 3 years, we've been building on it, and it's a journey. I would say like we have started going in that maturity curve well. Like, so now we have some big plans as we get into the future using the data catalog.
Great. Thank you, Srini. Gordon, Shiva?
Yeah,
Sure, I'll be
I
happy.
can go.
Well, Shiva, why don't you go?
All right, sure. Thank you.
I'll go last.
For us, basically, we were already a data-driven organization for the past so many years. And so the next logical step before we implemented a very robust, a long-lasting and scalable, data governance program was sort of, having a data catalog wherein, we could visualize basically, all the data assets and the data sources, etc., in one single place and in a simple repository kind of a thing. And, the people or the self-service analysis that is very permeated inside the organization, they will also have a documented version of, what the data assets are, where they are, and how they can, leverage the data, etc. So from that standpoint, we thought probably, data catalog is a good way to go there. And that's how we implemented data catalog about 5-6 years ago.
Gordon?
Sure. Yeah. So a really quick history lesson, I guess, because in my time, I've either built or rebuilt 9 high-performing analytics data warehousing teams, right, in my career. Sometimes I was the team, right? At least twice. But and then in the last 7 years, I've done it 5 times. And both internal and external to companies. I've seen hundreds of clients. And one of the things I've concluded from seeing all these clients is that data and analytics teams don't actually do anything. And what I mean by that is we don't do anything directly. We enable others, right? We don't sell things, we don't answer the phone, we don't build product. What we do is we enable others to make impactful decisions, right? And how do we make impactful decisions? Either by giving advice or delivering content that allows people to make those decisions. So I tend to think about analytics platforms as a way to find, use, and create content, right? Find the content you need, use the content you need, whether it be report or dashboard or advice or analysis, or create that if you can't do it. And so it's a product. And for any good product, you should have a catalog and inventory of the assets that are available, right? So literally the data catalog is there for us to help our users find the content, use the content need to make impactful decisions, right? So, and then what I've seen over and over again is that analytics teams and data teams tend to be really good at the creative content part and not so good about enabling their users to find and use that content, right? Anyone ever I've been to a place where I once saw a place that had 30,000 reports, right? No one could find content. So we need catalogs to help you understand this, tag it, show popularity, see what other people are using, right? All driving toward that decision. And I think in the manufacturing world, you have the unshipped inventory problem, right? When you build something, it's sitting in a storehouse, a warehouse is sitting in a van, hasn't gone to the customer. It's like that pizza that's delivered to your house. We all get food delivered now, right, during COVID, and no one tells you it's outside. It's not delivering any value yet, right? So the catalog helps us with that unshipped inventory problem, helps our users find the content they need on their own without bothering you, actually, right? Saves you time too. Helps them use that content, right? Definitions, whether it be fields or definition of metrics and so on. And then of course, creating content, filling those gaps where we have a gap and when we're missing content. That's the way I see catalogs and why I have implemented them over and over again, right?
Excellent. So, based on our prior panel, there was a division between, well, actually Sanjeev in his keynote showed out, it started out for compliance and governance perspectives, and now the use of the catalog has still supporting that, but also evolved into supporting discovery and BI and analytics. In terms of where you're using your catalog today, is it more of the former or the latter?
For us, it's a combination of both, actually, to be honest with you. So we are further along the curve, and so we've been able to leverage it for both situations.
How long have you been at it, Shiva, with your?
We've been at it for about 5.5, 6 years now.
Excellent.
And where did you start? What was, so just trying to understand your journey, what was the defining use case that started this journey?
Yeah, basically, we wanted to have all the data assets like any other asset in the business. We wanted to have visibility of the assets when it came to data. And so the data mapping, so we had an offline repository stored in the form of a SharePoint site, actually, that sort of documented all the data sources and the data systems and, at what time data comes into the data warehouse at that point in time. Now we've since moved out of a data warehouse into a consolidated, data lake, data warehouse kind of a thing. So to have a repository, we wanted to have a single source where everybody could see it, rather than going to a SharePoint site and viewing it kind of a thing. And so that's how, our journey started. So we wanted it as part of our data governance program, to be honest.
Okay. That's when at that point, you purchased a commercial data catalog?
Yes.
Okay. Srini, what about you? How did you get started?
So, as I said, I really asked that question. And then one of the things that we wanted to do is build on that enterprise data governance program. So I said, okay, instead of building an enterprise data governance program, just as a process and operating model, org model type of stuff, I myself have done many enterprise data governance strategy for the past over 10 years. So as I was looking at it, it gets very, without much of a tangible effect. So the data governance program gets really into the process aspect of it. To be frank, in my experience in the past, I've had successes with it, and I've had many failures of a data governance program. So having taken over this role and then starting to now position the enterprise data governance, I said, let's build the foundational data catalog as the foundation for All that is enterprise data governance operating model. So now all our stewards, data owners, data analysts, data architects have a data catalog, a platform to work off of, then slowly build that governance processes into the SDLC. So that's how we embarked on this journey, like a catalog as the foundation for an enterprise data governance program.
So when did you implement or first purchase your data catalog?
17, like second half of 2017.
Yeah. Okay. So you've had quite a few years of experience with it.
Yeah, and then like initially like started with the infrastructure, the architecture side of it, implementation, really get a platform going. I think the program actually started like 2018 Q1 to get to the mode of like really starting to collect all the data assets. Now, not just physical metadata, the technical metadata side of things, right? Like, and also start building the business glossary out of it, right? Like, so involved like stewards, like that is when like we were starting to name like the data stewards, right? Like, okay, who's going to manage a particular domain? Like we started creating that category, that hierarchy of domain, categories, terms, and elements, go down to the element level, start capturing all the business glossary and data definition. In parallel, also like start connecting to all our physical data sources. That includes like a 60-year-old mainframe system.
I just wanted to ask Srini a couple of questions. How many users, because you mentioned a lot of roles, so how many users do you have on your data catalog, and what was the adoption journey? Did you have like challenges, start and stop, and how did you get people?
Yeah, I would be lying if I say that like, oh, everything was super smooth from the start. No, it's not. So this is what I say, right? Like data is easy. Data management is easy. It's the people and process. Like the technology that comes to manage data is easy. Like treat the data catalog as one of the core technology and tool. Like now we are talking about data catalog is the new black in data management and analytics, right? Mm-hmm. So this technology is easy. Now really integrate that with the people and process, right? Like the culture of it, right? Like the norms of our business, like how we operate and how we bring in, right? Like, so it's like a crawl, walk, and run process. That's what I took, right? Like, so I took like 3 major phases of the program. As I said, right, like the first phase is about really that infrastructure, the tech implementation, the tech architecture side of things, getting everything ready. Then the first step is like involve data architects closely, right? Because they are the ones really closer to the data domain. They are creating the design, involve the data architects, and then now bridge them with the business data stewards as we build that business glossary terms and categories. And then like kind of like the third phase of it is right, like really operationalized. So now every data project that goes through the enterprise data pipeline like has to follow these cataloging process.
So you kind of addressed the next question I had, which is what challenges did you face in deploying a data catalog? But maybe Gordon or Shiva can jump in on that one.
Sure. I'm going to talk across, I guess, multiple instances of implementation. And by the way, it's great hearing other people's experience. Particularly for me, most of my experience has been on the hypergrowth startup side. So I have relatively little experience in the steady state of larger enterprise organizations, right? But one of the contrasts is between like a startup and an enterprise organization is that dilemma between centralized and distributed analytics, right? Startups, by definition, are so chaotic, they need really distributed analytics because they need the flexibility of moving fast at the cost of technical debt. You know, they don't think about governance. But as my job, I need to think about both enablement and governance, right? Because I need to think about beyond these 3 months. So, you know, in terms of implementation, the challenges is really, of course, building that content and getting it and getting people to use it, right? And so you think about like, what are those problems that people are tackling the most? And really, it's those very simple questions that people are asking your team about all the time. It's like, what's the definition of MRR? How do we define revenue here? How do we define profit? How do we define LTV? Where do I find this table? Where do I find this column? These very simple, normal problems, but they're all blockers, right? If someone can't find the definition of this table or a column, they can't use it. If they can't find the definition of this metric in a dashboard, they can't trust it. So we're trying to, again, go back to those, enabling those impactful decisions. And your teams generally don't want to have to answer those questions, but they will because they're helpful and they need to, right? Because their users are blocked. But who really wants to be asked over and over again, what's the definition of MRR, right? So that's what the catalog is for, to save your time here and enable people. And so thinking about adoption, I think about one critical adoption milestone is, and this is why catalogs, in the past catalogs used to be standalone spreadsheets and, they're all disasters, right? Is a critical milestone is when someone asks in Slack, hey, what's the definition of customer code, for instance? And another user answers by sending them a link to the catalog. At that point, you have some adoption, right? And then your user, and what have you just enabled? You've enabled your users to help each other. So you've created this platform for your users to discuss, as Tim was saying earlier, the knowledge graph, right? Because when you're setting someone a definition of a metric, what you're really saying is you're sharing someone else's opinion, or someone who's developed an algorithm, their opinion about some state of the company. Here's my, profit. Here is our opinion about the state of our profitability, of our financial success. And you've enabled a conversation across the knowledge graph. That's a big deal, right? So that's why, again, going back to why do you want to do this? But then, but you walk, as Srini said, was a crawl, walk, run, right? And in the beginning, you're just solving for those little small pains that are bothering people every day. But longer term, us as professionals who've done this before, think like, oh, if I have an inventory of all my assets, I can measure things like utilization. What's the most popular thing? I can measure things like test coverage, right? I can lay tests against that and say which objects are tested, which ones are not. I can do security assessments. Where do I have good coverage here, right? What assets are not being used? Which one should I retire? What's the cost of producing this asset? I can tie compute costs to it. I can tie processing time to it. All these things, right? I can harden the graph. If I know the CEO is hitting a dashboard every Monday morning, I can make sure that pipeline is particularly well tested and instrumented, right? I can't do any of this without this kind of cataloging metadata. Not in a systemic fashion. Sorry, that was a lot there. I hope that was useful.
It was good. Shiva, any challenges that you faced?
Yes, two challenges that stood out for us was basically, having the business glossary developed, so that, the catalog could really be of use. So in order to get the business glossary developed, we had to have a whole host of stakeholders involved and their commitment to sort of, defining the glossary, and not only defining the glossary, but maintaining it as and when it underwent a change. So that was a little bit of a challenge because we had to involve we are about 15,000 people in our organization. So the number of stakeholders were about 200 to 250 people from across various segments of the business. So to keep them engaged and to get that accomplished was a bit of a challenge for us. And then also the second challenge was basically in the area of, having consistent metadata standards established. Was another challenge for us, given the depth and breadth of data that we had, to be honest with you. So these took, both these activities actually, slowed down the implementation by almost about a good, 6 to 8 weeks time.
So you got to build the glossary before you deploy the catalog. Would you say that?
Yes, for us, it was critical because, if we wanted adoption, we thought saying that, having a consistent glossary is very critical for a data catalog to work effectively. That alongside with the metadata, consistency.
I think, Shiva, you were very savvy to get the stakeholders roped in early, because as engineers, and then, we don't really want to, nor can we really write all the definitions for for this content, right? We're not actually the experts on some of these elements, even though we populate them. At Fitbit, I used Warehouse, which was a LinkedIn, open source product. It's been since retired, but it had a MySQL backing. And using Looker, we were able to do things like run reports against our data catalog itself, right? And then measure coverage in terms of definitions. Hey, for these tables, we have 15% definition coverage. Let's set a goal for 25. and we would just send reports out all the time showing improvement and giving little rewards to people. I'd ask marketing, hey, can you fill in these terms and so on? And then, call them out in Slack and say, hey.
Case, right? So we've had some, say like to good extent of all the definitions, the business data definitions were captured during the SDLC process at the time of like the business analysis. Once the architects have modeled it, so they've actually captured business definitions for all those logical and physical elements. So we've had that, it was all like manual, right? So it was all like staying in a spreadsheet. So initially we also took a bulk of those definitions for enterprise data warehouse, and we did a full load into the data asset catalog.
So there was a lot of discussion in our first panel about choosing the right goals and use cases to get going. If you don't have a goal, you don't know what you're actually using this for specifically, that's a business value, you're not going to succeed. Did that resonate with you? Does anyone want to share, other than what you've already talked about, your goals and any specific use case that got you going?
It's critically important, right? I mean, catalog in some sense is not new, right? Catalog's been around for decades for data sources. It's just that the products weren't, earlier in my career, I would always think, well, they're not good data catalogs out there yet. And I think part of the problem is that people kept selling catalogs as opposed to solving problems. What is a high leverage business problem we're trying to solve for, as opposed to put a catalog out there? Because no one really wants to create the catalog, right? No one, it's, if you think of it like a map, people don't want maps. They want to know how to get places. They want to know what's out there. They want to know what the inventory is, right? They want to see where the hills are and all this other stuff. So in that case, starting again, going back to what Srini said, going back to crawling before you walk, is that I look at the initial customers of the catalog really being the analysts themselves, whether it be on my own team or the adjacent team, and because they're trying to create content. So they're initially interested in both the descriptions of the warehouse itself, right? The marks and fields and columns, and trying to find things. But then as time goes on, as you build content, there's a management aspect, right? Oh, I can use this to go see how often a field's being used, whatever, right? Or what tables are most popular. And then it becomes a repository for your metrics, because again, okay, now I'm an analyst. My job is to drive these impactful decisions. And if I can't communicate what's in my dashboard or in my report or in my analysis, who's going to trust it? Who's going to use it? Right? So then it becomes another critical way for you to help persuade your users to use this insight you've created.
So are you saying that your report's linked into the catalog so business users could look up definitions and things?
Yeah, I'm very much in the modern data stack side, right? I was Snowflake's biggest customer in 2016. I was an early adopter of Looker. I was an early adopter of Tableau back in 2005, I think it was, maybe 2006. And so I think a lot about dbt now, and have been since 4 or 5 years. And so if your catalog ends with only the fields in your database, you're really not shipping all the value in it, right? You really want to be aiming for that end-to-end lineage, so that when someone says, I'm looking at a Tableau dashboard, this number looks fantastic, it's an outlier, how do I trust it? How do I know it's correct? It's like, oh, well, the catalog is one of the ways you do that, right? Let me see the lineage. Okay, oh yeah, that comes from here. Let me see the tests that are placed against it. Oh yeah, all right, it's tested. Oh, hey, I can actually trust this number to use it to drive the business, or as opposed to it being an ETL error, right? And so, yeah, so absolutely your catalog should be tying into, and now it's relatively simple for a lot of them, into those assets that your people are consuming, the reports, the dashboards, the analyses.
In our case, also, Wayne, as I said, right, so we build that technical data elements, and also I picked up one use case, right? So there was no big bang approach for anything that we do when it comes to data management, or whether it's big data or so. Even in this case, right, I picked a small use case on one business unit, and then, as I said, we've had some definitions captured early on, now showcase how that can be loaded into the catalog. Now stewards appointed, stewards will go in and look at the terms, categories, and assign to different tree structure, the taxonomy process, and publish it, right? So prove that one end to end on a small use case, then started driving others in the same approach in parallel with other business units and business cases as well.
What was the scope of that initial small use case? Are we talking
You mean like number of elements,
Yeah,
timeline?
well, let's talk about number of people who are going to use it, number of elements, sure, amount of data.
Yeah, I think number of elements probably will be like less than 3,000, and people using it, say 30 plus. I remember like we are not such a large organization, right? Like so within data, overall data management and analysis, like there was like only 120 people. So I would say like, yeah, close to like 3,000 elements. I remember after going through that process, the success criteria defined, yeah, close to 3,000 elements. And like at the end of it, right, like 25 people using it. And that's like including stewards and analysts. And the project team was also small, right? Like one architect, one analyst working with a couple of business data stewards.
And then you just replicated that model, or did you
Yeah,
just roll it out?
replicated that like with other business units and use cases, and it continues even now.
Sure. Shiva, any perspectives from your end?
Yeah, the only thing that I want to add to what was already said before, for us, the use case was basically, we piloted the data catalog with a sensor, a streaming use case wherein we started collecting data from the sensor and started sort of establishing, data lineage from how the data was collected, where it was collected, when it was collected, at what frequency it's being collected, so on and so forth. We started documenting that as part of the, the proof of concept. And then we started off with about 2, locations from where we were collecting that. And then we scaled up the POC to about, 35 locations as well. So that was one of the use cases which we actually, piloted for the data catalog implementation.
Interesting. So you started with a streaming data use case? That's
because that was something that we were going to do eventually. And so we said, why not? We wanted to see whether the data catalog was able to support that particular use case, to be honest.
Interesting. So you wanted to put it through its paces. And how many people were you supporting in the initial use case?
The initial use case was probably about 20 people that we were supporting actually. Okay. And then we, of course, it grew up as the pilot increased from, 2 sites to about, 40 sites. It was over 100 people at that point in time. And once we got convinced that it was able to scale up and it was able to support that many, use cases and about 10 pings of sensor data within an hour from each of the test sites, and not only each of the test sites, but each of the equipments in the test sites, because there could be multiple equipments that we could be pinging the sensors or the data on the sensors from. We were quite convinced that it was the right solution.
Today, how many users do you have on the catalog?
Today, I have about over 2,000 users actually.
2,000?
Yeah, over 2,000, yeah, about 2,200 to be honest.
I see. And how many data assets, elements are you cataloging?
We have about 14,800, I think, in that neighborhood.
I see. Okay, thanks. And these assets include, what all do they include?
They include basically, physical assets as well as, the logical assets that we have from where, the data comes into our repositories.
So are these like relational table columns, or?
It's a combination of both, SQL and NoSQL data.
I see. I'm just curious because you had earlier on mentioned mainframes. Do you still have mainframes? Do you also catalog?
Yes, we do have mainframes. We do catalog mainframes as well. Yes,
I think in the same
manner as we do for structured data.
Excellent. Thank you.
Because consistency and standardization is what we believe in. Actually, we are a very highly, Lean Six Sigma oriented organization, and so repeatability and reproducibility is key for us.
Correct. Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Let's dive into success factors. We heard earlier that change management is a big issue. Tool complexity can be a big issue. Adoption is a huge issue. You guys have all been fairly successful deploying a data catalog. What would you say are your lessons learned and the key success factors to make it work?
Yeah, basically it's, data transparency, data democratization, data literacy, and user involvement and engagement And the culture of the organization overall, if it's going to be a data-driven culture in the organization where people speak with data and, talk to the business with data, then, it becomes much easier, to be honest. And that probably is the biggest, theme to our success.
So if you place a data catalog into a receptive culture, it's going to take off pretty easily.
Yes.
If it's not a receptive, i.e. data-driven culture, it might be a hard slog. No matter, what the scope or what the use case is, it's going to be a lot harder.
That's my personal view.
I mean, echoing Srini and Shiva's points before, like, starting small and demonstrating some success is very, very key. I think it's very savvy on their part. And, if we don't have a data-driven culture, the objective, of course, is to produce one. One where people are seeing these impactful decisions come from data, right? And so I think my tip for implementing a data catalog is to recognize that it's a product. So what is the business problem you're trying to solve, right? You're trying to help people find, use, and create content, at least in my opinion. And so like any SaaS product, there are some standard metrics you can look at that help you see the adoption and utilization of your catalog. Daily active users, right? Daily active users broken up by department, most popular objects. There's reliability numbers. Is the catalog available? There's freshness numbers about whether or not are you getting new content? Do you have other content? Do you have content that's stale? All these things. You can treat it like a SaaS product. And then when you see the gaps, when you either see the wins, you can reinforce those and echo them, right? If you show that this one dashboard is the most popular dashboard in the company, and then you celebrate that analyst or team analyst who produced that dashboard, other analysts are going to want that same spotlight, right? If you see that customer support is not using the catalog very much, then maybe there's an adoption problem there. It could be education, could be some lack of content, and then you can go target that, right? But treat it like a product, right? And it's agile. It's inherently agile.
Yeah. So in the analytics space, we have to eat our own dog food, right? And apply analytics to the implementation of the data catalog if we want to manage it properly.
100%. Drink your own champagne.
I agree, like what Shiva and Gordon said, right? Like in my case, right, like couple of things among many case for it, right? Like one is like analyzing data, not chasing data. As we know, data scientists, right, like always spend way a lot of time in really like chasing the data. A good catalog helps the data scientists or business analysts understand the data and answer the question they have pretty quickly. And also like eliminate data redundancies. Good catalog tool can help us like find the data redundancies and eliminate them. So this can help in organizations to save a lot of storage costs, like even though storage costs are cheap, but managing those storage and overall data management costs are very high when you introduce a lot of data silos and data redundancies. I think data catalog, well-built data catalog, a well-matured data catalog can help in alleviating data redundancies.
This is one of the tools that helps you change the narrative about your data team from being a cost center to being a strategic asset.
Yeah, great point.
Look at the things we deliver. Look at our utilization numbers, right?
Exactly.
All right, so we got less than a minute, so we're in the speed round. So one question for each of you, answer it in less than, let's say, 10 seconds now. Where do you take your data catalog from here? What is the next step?
So the next step is like for me, the way I'm looking at it is like productization and domainization of data, making it more data catalog to be that driver for all that is self-service data analytics and self-service data as a product. And eventually, as Gordon mentioned, like treat data as a strategic asset, right, rather than a cost center.
The area I really want to lean into going forward is extending the catalog to become part of the metric abstraction layer so that we can treat metrics as first-class objects that we are collaborating on, getting them out of the BI systems, right? And so really metrics being that essential portion of your knowledge graph.
Does that just mean managing the definitions of them, or have one place?
Mechanically, it is.
Execute
Mechanically, it's the recording of it. It's the collaboration on it. It's introducing into an engineering flow where you can do commits and PRs and merges on metrics, right? It's change management. It's all another form of inventory.
Yeah, for us, it's basically maintenance of the definitions and updating new items into the catalog as and when, certain new metrics in the business need to be tracked.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you all for participating in this panel and sharing your insights about how to successfully implement the data catalog. For our audience, we would like to run a little poll here. So let me just throw this up. If you could give us a little feedback on this panel, rate its usefulness, we'd appreciate it. See the responses coming in. So thank you all panelists, Srini, Gordon, and Shiva. Thank you so much for your participation. Appreciate it. All right, so now let's move on to our next and final session, our closing session. All right, so Sanjeev's going to wrap us up by talking about data catalog evaluation criteria.
Yes, so we have two parts of this final session. Thank you everyone for staying till the very end. So I'm going to walk you through the evaluation criteria, and then Wayne and I are going to do this unscripted fireside chat about what we have learned today and what our key takeaways were. So with that, so we have 30 minutes, so I'm going to get started. I had promised earlier in the day that I am going to talk about evaluation criteria based on the data catalog categories that you see on this slide. So you will see in a few minutes, maybe some of you have already downloaded the criteria. It's in the chat window. There's a link to it. If you have, that's great. Wayne, I thought we might just shake things up a bit and take some questions if they come along as I'm presenting instead of waiting till the very end. So feel free, if you still have some burning questions or your questions did not get answered, feel free to ask them now. So this is the framework on which we defined our data catalog. Our criteria consist of 12 categories. So if I may start with connectors, if you notice, when we were just doing the CDO panel, I was very interested in asking Shiva, do you still have mainframes? Because if you have mainframes, then your evaluation criteria should have a section that says, do you have a connector for, IBM DB2 on ZOS, for example? So when you see something called connectors, this is the part in the evaluation criteria where we have a number of what we call features or questions to ask. Everybody has connectors for relational database management systems, not a problem, but fewer have it for NoSQL databases like MongoDB or Neo4j graph database. So if your use case requires those connectors, then those should be in your evaluation criteria. Then there are unstructured data that I talked about earlier when I mentioned natural language processing. But then there's a whole section on data management, like what connectors do you have for ETL tools? Because that's where data transformation is happening, like Azure Data Factory or Google Data Flow or AWS Glue. So because when I show lineage, I need to be able to extract metadata from these ETL products. Query logs, you heard Alation talk quite a bit about query logs. So like that, there are many different options. But then there are also options for where you do not have a out-of-the-box connector. How easy is it for you to build a connector? What languages can you use? How long does it take? So these things fall under the connectors category of the evaluation criteria. Similarly, when we come to profiling, so how do you profile the data? Do you read, let's say in case of a relational database, they have a data dictionary. How often do you pull that metadata information? Can you automate it? Is it real time? Some products have started offering a different type of profiling where as soon as new data comes in or changes, you push the changes to a bus, like an event streaming bus like Kafka, and then you read it off that. So there's a push and there's a pull model. We don't see push very often, but some use cases may require that. Similarly, then we come to classification. So we heard a lot about classification, rule-based, machine learning-based. I think Big ID mentioned the ability to define your own classifiers. Some classifications are based on well-known taxonomy. If you're in financial services, you're probably aware of FIBO, financial industry ontology. So there are many different ways of doing classification, and those are listed again in the criteria. Again, when it comes to business glossary, it's like, what level of definition do you give to your business glossary? Can you also define business glossary for your rules, for your formulae? So basically, if somebody comes to, let's say, net retention value, what is the definition of that? I had a very interesting conversation just this week with the ex-head of data from a ride-sharing company, one of the world's largest ride-sharing company. What I learned was that even something as mundane as location in a ride-sharing company could have different meanings. And there were about 10,000 different locations where the location asset was being kept, like reports, data sources, and so on. So that's important. Then curation, it's like, what kind of capabilities do you have for collaboration and adding curation to your data sources? Now, lineage, you may think is something simple. What can go wrong in lineage? But there's a lot you can do in lineage. The first thing is, at what level do you have lineage? The lineage could be at the highest entity level, but then some products have really good lineage where you can keep drilling down. Every time you drill, you go from the entity to row to column. You can see the SQL code, which was written to transform the data. You can do filtering on lineage, because if you have hundreds and thousands of data elements, your lineage can be very complex spaghetti code, so how do you apply row-level filtering so you can very clearly see lineage? The lineage these days does not only show the flow of data, but it can also show maybe the quality scores, sensitive data. So this is how advanced lineage has become. One last thing about lineage is that the lineage is a graphical representation of the flow of data. And that graphical representation is coming from the metadata, both technical and business, which is kept in the underlying data store. That data store most likely could be a Postgres or MySQL, some open source database. So it's able to draw that lineage. However, we are seeing there's a lot of movement towards graph data stores, because you want to see your lineage not just as a flow diagram, but maybe, in terms of objects with, connections to other objects. So having a more of a graphical approach to the lineage. So let's move to the next list, certification. How do I make it easy for the consumers, like let's say a data scientist, to pick the right terminology? Maybe I have location in multiple data sources and different other places, but if I can certify and say, this location is what you should use, it's ranked the highest. So the ranking, all of this also helps when we search the data. And Alation mentioned, when you search the data, you want to rank it by what is certified at the highest level. So we have criteria pertaining to that. Then there's a very interesting, I would say, from a business end user point of view, it's like, who cares? But IT people care a lot, is a workflow. I'm a new employee into an organization. I want access to certain pieces of data. How does my access get logged into something like Jira or ServiceNow? But it interoperates with my data catalog. So there is a proper tracking of request, approval workflows, how long to keep the data. GDPR requires to make sure that there is a clear definition of why this data is being used in the analytics. Do you have customer consent, and so on? Search, again, we've touched upon search. Is it search based on a faceted search? Like we talked about Amazon.com, where you have categories by which you are searching, or can I do a SQL search? Can the SQL search have parameters so I can make it dynamic? Can I do a GraphQL API-based search? So also becomes quite detailed. And then there's a whole natural language generation piece where I can ask a question, a natural language question, and it's able to translate it into its own language. Data governance platform. Now, this is a very, very big topic, and this is what we will open up when we come back to you in April. And this would be all the touch points of things that we talked about, like data quality, master data management, data access governance, data orchestration. All those criteria will be detailed here. At this point for data catalog, all we are asking is, do you or do you not have an integration to these products? Now, what you didn't see in the previous diagram are these last two pieces. So I'll just show you architecture and vendor. And this is, what is a deployment architecture? Is it containerized? Is it on-prem and cloud? Does it use an agent to extract data? Is it agentless? What language, what's the underlying databases that are used? Those are architecture questions. And then we, again, Alation had mentioned that you should look at the vendor aspects. And this is how many successful implementations do you have? What kind of documentation do you have? This is to me the most important thing, the user experience. What is the ease of use, ease of maintenance, and ease of development? And then, of course, there's a very big section on pricing. Pricing is all over the board. You know, some people price a product based on the number of connectors to the source system. Some do it on the amount of data catalog. Some do it on the number of concurrent users. And this list goes on, which you will see in the criteria. So here is a snapshot on the right-hand side of how the criteria looks like. You can see we've got this category called connectors. There are 12 categories. We just looked at it. And then we have a number of questions we ask. These are the capabilities. And then we have about 200 plus features. The best part about this evaluation criteria is that you get to apply the weights that you feel are important for your requirement. You get to score and rank and then come up with a criteria that you can use across multiple different products. So, and this was shared with you in the chat window, or if you didn't get it there, you can always get it if you're listening to the recording from techvent.eckerson.com. Wayne, that's what I wanted to cover, and let's maybe talk about what we learned today.
Yeah, key takeaways. There we go. All right.
I can start with something that stood out for me, and I have to give credit to Jeffrey from Sandhill for that. I really love the way he said that, you know, in a Venn diagram, you got data governance and data management, and they overlap, and that overlap is increasing. When I was at Gartner, I actually got a lot of pushback from some of my colleagues who were purist data governance people, because I guess it's my IT bent, my technology bent, that makes me include a lot of data management into data governance. So sometimes I conflate data governance and data management. I'm just curious, what's your take on it? And I do see these merging, but purists will fight on that because they say, no, data governance, data stewardship has its own place and data management has its own.
Right. I think for the last 30 years, we've been focused on data management and really didn't understand that there was another component called data governance. That was kind of like an overlay, but ideally, as Jeff said, data governance and data management converges to just become data work. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And that was his quote. So no, I'd agree. But I think what's happened is that all of a sudden, the last 5 years, we've acknowledged and recognize data governance as almost a discipline that needs to, to be mastered in order to make use of your data. Your data management is all for naught unless you do have data governance. So that's getting a lot of the lion's share of attention these days, as it should. But ultimately, it's just a fundamental aspect of data management. And the two combined to create what Jeff said is data work. So I'd agree.
Yeah, so one interesting thing that I just got reminded of was many customers with which I did inquiries in the past would tell me, we want to do data governance, but data governance, we've tried it 3 times and we failed, and now it has a negative connotation. So we don't want to call it data governance, but we understand we need to do it. So one term which I also heard some vendors mention today is data enablement as an alternative.
Data enablement. Okay, well, our industry is really good at creating new terms and if you just stick around long enough, you'll, the old technology or approach will get a new label, and the new people in the industry won't know any different. But us gray-haired people, we see that. But I don't know about data enablement. Yeah, there was one attendee who didn't like the term data catalog, thought that was too antiquated in and of itself. So maybe data enablement is a good replacement for that. I don't know.
The lesson that I have learned in my long career is that what's old is golden. We keep coming up with like new terms, new technologies, new concepts, but literally it's like old wine in a new bottle. So what we've learned in our college days, I still use them. I think it's still valid, but we may just call it something more sexy. And it looks good on our resumes.
So we did have a long discussion of, the intersection of data governance with the data catalog, intersection of data quality and the data catalog, and really which comes first. And there's a little bit of tussling there, but in the end, I think most of the panelists agreed that you need to have some foundational data governance in place if you're going to make any use of a data catalog.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense. If you're just going out on a fishing expedition, probably you're not going to succeed. And you just may end up making more work for yourself and spending more money than otherwise.
There was a very good quote in the Q&A from somebody, and they said that we keep getting bogged down in rules, procedures, definitions. So yeah, it's a delicate balance, both need to happen, but yes, you need some sort of semblance of what you want to do. I really like what somebody said, that there are, 20, 30 different things you can do with your data catalog. Pick 1 or 2, and define that, and then go discover the data and build it and iteratively add to it.
Right. You got to define your goals and set an initial use case and make sure the scope is small and manageable enough and work it. Hopefully it will succeed, and then replicate it. So that seemed to be a recipe for success. There was another thing that people mentioned, which was, we talked about ML, machine learning, and how that's a critical part of the data catalog but I think the panelists were very clear that it's got a limited scope. It's really useful for data classification, when you're ingesting data to identify the type of data it is, especially if it's personal or sensitive data, and for recommendations. And a lot of the tools now have built-in ways to classify specific types of data, like social security numbers and things like that. But it's not good in other areas until it has a sufficient amount of data on which it can be trained. So it's not a magic bullet until you're pretty mature in your deployment. I think that's an interesting takeaway that I heard.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that this question also came up is, where do you draw the line between vendors collaborating, partnering versus overlapping in functionality? And I think, vendors are being nice to each other, but I think we are reaching a stage where 2 partners one day suddenly become competitors next day. Just to give you an example, a vendor who's not participating today, but is one of the leaders in this space, is Collibra. Collibra did not have a lineage product. They used to OEM Manta. And so they were partners. And then they bought this Czech company called SQL Tap and introduced Collibra Lineage. Then later on last year, they bought OwlDQ, and they brought in data quality monitoring aspects into their product. So all of a sudden, their partners went from being partners to competitors. And I think we will see this quite a bit. where, all these companies we talk to today, they are constantly adding new capabilities on top of their data catalog. So I know what you think about that.
It was interesting how that evolved in the discussion between Elation and Big Data, who are partners, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And people trying to figure out, scratching their head, well, how do they really partner? It's still not clear to me. And Mitesh from Elation talked about the Frankenstack. And he probably was taking, a little bit of a shot at exactly what you just described of a competitor who's building things through acquisition versus someone like Big ID who's building things organically, building apps on top of data catalog platform. I'm not sure, I think architecturally that's probably a better approach, always is. I'm not about the apps though, and how those, I guess those are just kind of new modules that people can add on for an extra price usually, right?
That is true, yeah. And I think vendors have a very difficult position because they're between a rock and a hard place. I think this is my opinion. They don't have a choice. They have to keep adding these because what happens is, Informatica comes up with a new catalog and it has all of these features. And all of a sudden, the customers are looking at, let's say, Informatica. So Collibra or Elation look at that and say, oh, we need to have that capability built in, irrespective of the fact that we have these partnerships. And, you look at OneTrust. There's a very interesting thing. We didn't talk about OneTrust much today, but OneTrust, when I got first introduced to them many years ago in conferences, they were purely a data privacy workflow vendor. And from that, they did some acquisitions, and now they have a full-fledged data catalog, but they have all kinds of whistleblower or ESG modules. They have all kinds of modules, but they've come from data privacy. Elation has come from data consumption. Big IDs come from data discovery. Irwin has come from data integration. So you see that all these different players are kind of converging into this catalog.
Yeah, and the one that you didn't mention, Prometheum, is also in our virtual bake-off. They started out, the founders started out running a data catalog company and then left because they said, their customers got frustrated because it's great to know where the data is and what it's comprised of, but they want to, how do you access it and do something with it, which is, what they wanted to do ultimately. So Prometheum is kind of morphing into, leveraging the search and profiling of a data catalog, which they said was the most popular features, most important features, and then adding on data preparation, data virtualization, visualization to create a complete stack for end-to-end for finding the data to, analyzing it and displaying it. So a one-stop shop for answering questions, which is really what it's all about.
And then, there's another category, by the way, which is, people are trying to now catalog Kafka topics, for instance. And as we see the rise of IoT, 5G, I think next year, 2022, we're going to see a lot of that. So how do you, handle that? So there's a slew of companies that are focused on that. And my guess is that those companies and the companies we talked to today are going to sort of start converging.
Okay, so audience, if you're still out there, you have some key takeaways, please enter that into the chat. Got a few things here. Rana asked, how are people using the term data intelligence? It's a good question. That gets thrown around a lot. I think it does have multiple meanings. Sanjeev, what does that mean to you, that term, data intelligence?
So Wayne, you've already heard my diatribe against, labels, so I would just say, data intelligence means different things to different people. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I know it's a common term that I see in vendor presentations a lot. So I think we're basically at the end of our time. I want to thank all of our participants and audience members who were there, all of our panelists who shared their thoughts and insights. If you have a question for one of our 6 vendor partners, Elation, Big ID, Quest, Sandhill, Prometheum, OneTrust, and Data.World, last but not least. So please go spend time with the vendors, ask any additional questions. Hopefully they piqued your interest in learning more about their products. So from all of us, thank you again, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.